The thing about working as the only human weapons tester in the Galactic Defense Initiative is that you quickly learn just how differently various species define the word defensive. For most of them, it means barely enough to deflect a meteor. For me, Kira Patel, it means enough firepower to make would-be attackers reconsider their life choices. Absolutely not. Director Vix's crystalline appendages clicked rapidly against his console, a sign I'd learned meant extreme agitation. These modifications would quadruple the power consumption of the entire Centaurian defense grid. I took a slow sip from my weapons testing. Because someone has to break it mug, letting the caffeine fuel my patience. With all due respect, Director, their current setup couldn't stop a determined space tugboat, let alone an actual military vessel. The Director's crystalline form shifted through several shades of alarmed purple. Behind him, my immediate supervisor, Senior Engineer X-427, was doing that thing where their tentacles tied themselves into nervous knots. I'd caused 3 of their predecessors to request transfers to deep space assignments, which they considered safer than supervising my testing protocols. Miss Patel, Vix's voice crackled with static, another sign of distress. You've been with us for 6 standard months. In that time, you've submitted 47 proposals for weapons upgrades. Every single one has been labeled extremely concerning by our safety board. Thank you. I replied with genuine pride. I'm hoping to hit 50 by the end of the quarter. A small crowd of junior engineers had gathered at the laboratory entrance, their various appendages and sensory organs all focused on our exchange. Most species in the galaxy evolved as prey animals, which explained a lot about their approach to defense technology. Humans, with our persistence predator background, tended to see things differently. Perhaps X-427 ventured, their voice modulator pitched high with anxiety. We could discuss a more moderate approach. I pulled up the holographic display of my latest design. This is moderate. I haven't even suggested antimatter containment units yet. The entire room flinched. Someone in the back dropped their datapad. Look, I said, switching to my serious voice. I've reviewed the historical data on every major conflict in this sector for the past 1,000 years. The pattern is always the same. Someone shows up with bigger guns than expected, and suddenly all those adequate defenses aren't so adequate anymore. Director Vix's crystal matrix vibrated at a frequency that suggested he was developing the alien equivalent of a migraine. Our defense systems have served us well for millennia. Against known threats, sure. But what about the unknown ones? What about the species who haven't made contact yet? The ones who might have evolved from apex predators like humans? The crowd at the door thinned considerably at that suggestion. X-427's tentacles were now so knotted I worried we'd need medical intervention to untangle them. Furthermore, I continued, warming to my topic, I've noticed some interesting anomalies in recent deep space scans. Radiation signatures that don't match any known species technology. Movement patterns that suggest. Enough. Director Vix's interruption sent crystalline chimes echoing through the lab. Miss Patel, your enthusiasm for your work is noted, but we cannot simply. The laboratory's emergency alerts chose that moment to start blaring. Red warning lights bathed the room in an ominous glow as automated systems began reporting multiple unknown vessels appearing at the edge of our detection range. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. Instead, I calmly took another sip from my mug and pulled up my weapons testing schedules. So about those power consumption concerns. Implementation authorized. Vix said without hesitation, his crystal form now a very interesting shade of what I'd come to recognize as, oh shit green. All of them. Excellent. I cracked my knuckles and began accessing my database of emergency designs, the ones I'd been working on in secret, the ones that made my official proposals look tame in comparison. X-427, you might want to alert the medical bay. We're about to stress test some systems in ways that might cause widespread fainting. As alarms continued to blare and my alien colleagues rushed to battle stations, I couldn't help but smile. Finally, a chance to show them why humans never believed in such a thing as excessive when it came to defense. Maybe after this, they'd stop questioning my standard testing protocols. After all, in my line of work, if something hasn't exploded, you haven't tested it properly. And I had a feeling we were about to do a lot of testing. The next few hours proved two things I'd long suspected. First, that my excessive defensive modifications were actually barely adequate. And second, that watching aliens cope with human-level weapons output was never going to stop being entertaining. Status report. Director Vix demanded, his crystalline form vibrating at frequencies that threatened to shatter nearby glassware. The good news, I said, fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces, is that my upgraded defense grid is holding. I paused for dramatic effect. The better news is that I can triple its current output. Triple? Anx 427's tentacles went from anxious writhing to full paralysis. But the current levels are already beyond our highest safety parameters. Which is exactly why we're still here to have this conversation. I gestured to the tactical display where dozens of unknown vessels were probing our defenses. Notice how they're testing for weaknesses. These aren't opportunistic raiders. They're methodical, organized, and... I grinned as one of my automated countermeasures activated, about to get a very nasty surprise. The lead vessel of the attacking fleet suddenly found itself enveloped in what I like to call the recursive feedback loop, essentially turning their own scanning beams into a weapon against them. The ship's shields flared brilliant purple before collapsing entirely. Impossible, came a new voice from the doorway. I turned to see Ambassador Lyra of the Zephyrites, her gossamer winged form shimmering with what I recognized as agitation. Those defense patterns, they match our most advanced military protocols. I felt my expression harden. Funny coincidence, that. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as implications settled in. The Zephyrites were supposed to be our allies, one of the oldest and most peaceful civilizations in the galaxy. They were also, I hadn't failed to notice, the only species whose technology could have produced the energy signatures I'd been tracking. Ambassador, Director Vix began, diplomatic training kicking in. Surely you're not suggesting. What I'm suggesting, I interrupted, bringing up another display, is that someone has been feeding our defensive specifications to these attackers. Someone with high-level access. Someone who might have insisted on reviewing all our security protocols for peaceful purposes just last month. The ambassador's wings stiffened. How dare you, Imply? She never finished the sentence. At that moment, three things happened simultaneously. My secondary defense grid detected a massive power spike from the attacking fleet. Ambassador Lyra attempted to access a hidden transmitter in her ceremonial sash, and I triggered the containment field I'd secretly installed in the laboratory ceiling 2 months ago. The ambassador found herself suspended in a bubble of energy, her wings beating uselessly against the barrier. The transmitter clattered to the floor, smoking slightly from where my countermeasures had fried its circuits. Let's talk about the Zephyrite ascendancy, I said quietly, noting with satisfaction that my alien colleagues were backing away from both me and the ambassador. Let's talk about how a supposedly peaceful species has been building the galaxy's largest stealth fleet. Let's talk about why you're so interested in our defense specifications. You understand nothing. Lyra spat, her peaceful diplomat facade cracking. The galaxy needs order, structure. The chaos of younger species like yours keeps you up at night. I suggested, already implementing my more aggressive defense protocols. Makes you worry that your 10,000 years of careful planning might get disrupted. Good. Director Vix's crystalline form had shifted to a color I'd never seen before, somewhere between abject terror and dawning comprehension. The Zephyrites, all this time, have been playing a very long game, I confirmed, watching as my enhanced weapons systems forced the attacking fleet into retreat. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed all younger species would think like them. Calculated, cautious, Predictable. I walked over to the ambassador's containment field, enjoying the way her serene mask had completely shattered. Instead, they got humanity. We don't do predictable. We look at safety protocols and see suggestions. We look at power limits and see challenges. We look at carefully laid plans spanning millennia and think, hey, I bet I could disrupt that in an afternoon. X 427, showing surprising backbone, had already called for security. As they led the ambassador away, I turned back to my weapons console with a grin that made several junior engineers flinch. Now, about those antimatter containment units I mentioned earlier. The collective groan from my alien colleagues was music to my ears. They might not appreciate my methods, but they couldn't argue with results. And something told me we were going to need a lot more results before this crisis was over. After all, if there's one thing humans excel at, it's turning defensive technologies into something that makes aggressive species reconsider their life choices. And I had so many more ideas to test. The next few days at the Galactic Defense Initiative made my previous reputation for causing alien anxiety look positively tame. With the Zephyrite threat now exposed, I finally had carte blanche to implement what I called my actually adequate defense protocols. The results were entertaining. This is madness. High Commander Trill of the Galactic Security Council didn't so much enter my lab as explode into it, their bioluminescent plumage flashing warning patterns. You've converted half the sector's communication relays into weapon platforms. Dual-purpose weapon platforms, I corrected, not looking up from my work. They still relay communications. They just also happen to house quantum destabilization arrays now. Quantum destabilization. Trill's translator actually glitched trying to process the concept. Behind them, my ever-faithful supervisor, X 427, had developed a new nervous tic where their tentacles formed perfect fractals. Don't worry, I assured them, making final adjustments to my latest project. I've run all the simulations. There's only a 0.01% chance of accidentally creating the temporary dimensional rift. A temporary, no way, hey. I waved off their concern. Look, the Zephyrite have been playing this game for millennia. Their entire strategy relies on knowing exactly what their opponents are capable of. So we need to be capable of things that nobody, including ourselves, sometimes can predict. Director Vix chose that moment to materialize in the lab, his crystalline form vibrating with urgent news. The Zephyrite fleet, they're mobilizing. All of them. Long-range scans indicate thousands of ships emerging from hidden space docks throughout the sector. Finally, I grinned, activating my main display. I was wondering how long it would take them to realize their stealth systems weren't working anymore. The room went silent except for the soft hum of equipment and what might have been X 427 whimpering quietly in the corner. "What did you do?" Trill demanded, their plumage now cycling through colors I'm pretty sure weren't supposed to be visible in our dimension. Remember last week when everyone said I was crazy for releasing that cloud of experimental sensor drones into the quantum slitstream? I pulled up a new set of readings. Turns out they've been very busy mapping every Zephyrite hidden facility in a 100 light-year radius. Also, they might have infected their entire network with what I like to call chaos protocols. Chaos protocols. Director Vix seemed to be stuck in a loop, his crystal matrix showing stress fractures. Simple, really. Every time they try to coordinate their fleet movements, their navigation systems introduce random variations. Small ones, just enough to make their famous precision tactics, well, less precise. I took a sip from my new mug. This one reading, I break physics for fun. It's amazing how problematic that can be when you're trying to maintain formation with 10,000 ships. High Commander Trill's plumage had settled into a solid ultraviolet of despair. The Council will never approve. The Council, I interrupted, has spent the last 1,000 years allowing the Zephyrite to accumulate power because they played by the rules. They were predictable. Safe. I stood up, letting them see the holographic display of my full defense network. Humanity doesn't do safe. We don't do predictable. And right now, that's exactly what the galaxy needs. A noob alarm started blaring. This one with a tone I'd specially designed to convey exciting things are about to happen. The main screen showed the Zephyrite fleet attempting to form up into their traditional battle formations, only to have their ships drift slightly out of alignment every time they got close. "They're going to attack anyway," Director Vix observed, his color shifting to what I'd learned was his accepting inevitable doom shade. "Their entire philosophy is based on perfect order. What you've done. They'll see it as an existential threat." Good. I began activating systems that made everyone else in the room take several steps back, because I haven't even shown them my favorite upgrades yet. Did you know you can use quantum entanglement to turn an entire solar system's magnetic field into one big weapon? Neither did I until last Tuesday. That's not possible," Trill stammered. "The power requirements alone." "Oh, the power requirements are ridiculous," I agreed cheerfully. "Completely absurd. Totally impossible according to every known law of physics." I paused for effect. "Want to see how I did it anyway?" The collective groan from my alien colleagues was drowned out by the sound of the Zephyrite fleet dropping out of FTL, right into the middle of what I like to call my probability redistribution field. The results were immediate and spectacular. Ships designed to move in perfect synchronization suddenly found themselves operating on slightly different versions of reality. Weapons calibrated to microscopic precision started generating effects that their targeting computers insisted were mathematically impossible. "By the way," I added, watching chaos spread through the enemy fleet, "has anyone ever told you about the human concept of malicious compliance? Because I think you're all about to see a practical demonstration." As the lab erupted into controlled panic around me, I couldn't help but smile. The Zephyrites had spent 10,000 years creating the perfect order. They were about to learn why humans had a reputation for being agents of chaos, and I hadn't even gotten to show them my antimatter experiments yet. If you want to understand the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to warfare, consider this. When we told the Galactic Security Council that we'd weaponized uncertainty itself, their first response was to check if we were joking. Their second response was to faint. Their third response, after regaining consciousness, was to demand how it was possible. "It's really not that complicated," I explained to the emergency session of the council, enjoying how my casual tone made their various appendages twitch. "You just have to deliberately ignore about 40 different laws of physics." The grand archon of the council, a being of pure energy contained in an ornate metallic shell, flickered in what I'd learned was extreme distress. "Laws of physics cannot simply be ignored." "Not with that attitude," I agreed. On the main display behind me, the Zephyrite fleet continued to struggle with their new reality, where certainty was more of a suggestion than a rule. But here's the thing about human engineers. Tell us something's impossible, and we take it as a personal challenge. The massive hologram showing the battle zone flickered as another wave of quantum distortions rippled through space. Ships engineered for perfect precision found themselves dealing with targeting systems that insisted they were simultaneously 3 meters to the left and 2 seconds in the future. "Status update," Director Vix's voice crackled over the comm, his crystalline form visible in a side screen. "The Zephyrite command structure is fragmenting." "Of course it is," I said, pulling up more detailed readings. "Their entire civilization is built on absolute control and perfect order. Take that away." And I gestured to the chaos unfolding before us. The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated protests, warnings, and what I'm pretty sure were several species versions of prayer. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the patterns emerging from the apparent randomness. "They're adapting," I noted with professional admiration, switching to backup protocols, trying to establish new command and control systems. "Very impressive." X-427. Activate contingency protocol, entropy prime. My faithful supervisor, who had somehow been volunteered to assist me at the council session, extended a trembling tentacle toward the control interface. The one you labeled when everything else isn't chaotic enough. That's the one. The effects were immediate and spectacular. The Zephyrite fleet's attempts at reorganization collided with what I like to call a cascading probability avalanche. Ships that had been struggling with minor targeting errors suddenly found themselves having to calculate firing solutions in geometries that shouldn't exist. What have you done? The Grand Archon's energy form was pulsing with patterns that suggested either extreme horror or reluctant fascination. Introduced a little creativity into their perfectly ordered universe, I replied, watching as the mighty Zephyrite armada began to break apart under the strain of dealing with reality as humans saw it, full of impossible possibilities and improbable solutions. That's when the Zephyrite High Command made their final mistake. They deployed their ultimate weapon, a device they'd spent thousands of years perfecting, designed to impose absolute order on a galactic scale. I've been waiting for this. Anx 427. I said calmly, remember last week when you asked why I was installing quantum resonance fields in a fractal pattern throughout the sector? My supervisor's tentacles tied themselves into what I'm pretty sure was a new mathematical impossibility. You said it was for emergency celebrations. I may have understated things slightly. I activated my final set of protocols, the ones even I had labeled only if everything else has gone completely wrong, and we need more wrong. The Zephyrite ultimate weapon, a marvel of engineering designed to impose perfect order on reality itself, met my hastily constructed network of quantum irregularities. The result was, well, several members of the council developed new sensory organs just to properly appreciate how spectacular the failure was. Space itself seemed to hiccup. Reality took a brief vacation and came back with souvenirs from dimensions that shouldn't exist. The Zephyrite fleet, caught in the backwash of their own weapon colliding with purposeful chaos, found themselves dealing with physics that had decided to take a creative writing course. Fascinating, I muttered, making notes as ships designed for perfect order tried to cope with the fact that their weapons now produced advanced theoretical mathematics instead of energy beams. I didn't expect the quantum resonance to produce actual poetry. We should study that. After we finish saving the galaxy, of course. The council chamber had gone silent except for the soft sound of various species trying to reboot their understanding of reality. On the main display, the mighty Zephyrite armada was in full retreat, their perfectly ordered civilization confronting the terrifying reality that they had finally encountered something they couldn't predict or control: human innovation. Director Vix, I called over the comm, you might want to prepare for surrender negotiations, and maybe stock up on calming substances. I have a feeling they're going to need them when I explain exactly how we turned their own concept of order against them. As the emergency session devolved into what I'm pretty sure was a philosophical crisis, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best defense isn't just a good offense. It's an offense that makes the enemy question whether reality itself is on your side. And I still hadn't shown them my antimatter experiments. The surrender negotiations with the Zephyrite went about as well as you'd expect when one side had just weaponized uncertainty and the other was having an existential crisis about the nature of reality. I insisted on holding the talks in my lab, partly for security reasons, but mostly because I enjoyed watching their faces when they saw my works in progress board. This cannot be happening. The Zephyrite's supreme commander, a being of pure crystalline thought named Essence of Perfect Order, had been repeating this phrase for approximately 20 minutes. Their once immaculate form now showed distinct signs of what I could only describe as geometric distress. Oh, but it is, I said cheerfully, pulling up holographic displays of their fleet's spectacular defeat. Would you like to see the mathematical proofs? I had to invent 3 new branches of physics to explain them, but they're quite elegant in their own chaotic way. Director Vix, who had somehow survived the entire crisis without completely shattering, made a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. Perhaps we could focus on the terms of surrender. Of course, I pulled up another display, this one showing my latest project. Speaking of which, how do you feel about probability inversions? I've been working on something interesting with causality loops. The entire Zephyrite delegation simultaneously shifted 3 micrometers to the left, their species equivalent of a horrified flinch. Supreme Commander Essence of Perfect Order's crystalline structure emitted a high-pitched tone that made several pieces of lab equipment start solving differential equations spontaneously. You're proposing to monitor our compliance by breaking the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Their translators struggled to convey the proper level of existential dread. Breaking is such a harsh word, I replied, making a few adjustments to my designs. I prefer creatively reinterpreting. Besides, it's not like we're doing anything truly radical. Yet, I paused meaningfully. Unless you prefer to see my experiments with quantum paradox cascades. We surrender. The words burst from the entire delegation in perfect harmony, probably the last time they'd achieved such synchronization for quite a while. Unconditionally. Just, please stop inventing new ways to break reality. X427, who had developed an impressive resistance to my methods over the past few months, extended a surprisingly steady tentacle to offer the formal surrender documents. I noticed they'd labeled them Reality Preservation Agreements, a nice diplomatic touch. As the Zephyrite delegation signed the documents, each signature slightly out of phase with reality. Thanks to lingering effects from my defense systems, I couldn't help but reflect on how we'd gotten here. A species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of control, undone by humanity's fundamental inability to accept limitations. There is one thing I don't understand. Supreme Commander Essence of Perfect Order ventured as the proceedings concluded. Your species is so young, so chaotic. How did you know our perfect order was vulnerable to such methods? I smiled, remembering all those times my excessive testing protocols had been questioned, because perfect order is predictable. And if there's one thing humans excel at, it's finding ways to make the predictable interesting. The aftermath of what would become known as the Reality Readjustment Crisis brought significant changes to the Galactic Defense Initiative. My testing protocols, once considered dangerously excessive, were now the new standard. Several alien species developed entirely new philosophical frameworks just to cope with the implications of human engineering principles. Director Vix, showing either tremendous courage or the crystal equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome, approved my request for an expanded testing facility. Just, please, he added, his form shifting through several previously undocumented colors. Warn us before you experiment with fundamental forces again. The paperwork for reality breaches is becoming excessive. X427, now heading their own department of human-inspired innovation containment, had finally stopped flinching at my project proposals. Mostly, they still developed a nervous twitch whenever I used phrases like theoretical impossibility or just for fun. As for me, well, let's just say that having proven humans could effectively weaponize uncertainty itself opened up some interesting new research directions. The antimatter experiments were just the beginning. Ms. Patel, a junior engineer, called from the doorway of my lab, their multifaceted eyes spinning with anxiety. The council is asking about your latest proposal. Something about quantum entropy cascades and recreational paradox generation. I grinned, pulling up the schematics for my newest project. Tell them not to worry. This one probably won't break reality. I paused for effect. At least, not in this timeline. The sound of multiple species simultaneously developing new stress responses echoed through the corridor. Just another day at the office for humanity's representative in galactic weapons testing. After all, if you're going to be known as the species that turned chaos into a defense strategy, you might as well embrace it. Now, about those antimatter experiments.